Hi, this is William with part 2 of our final video project. I still have, say hi.
We're still here. We're still here.
Okay. The second book that we are analyzing is Literacy and Social Studies, Strategies for Improving Comprehension and Critical Thinking. The main conceit of this book is that, one, we as social studies teachers have an opportunity to utilize a whole bunch of wondrous materials, textbooks, primary sources, news outlets, a whole bunch of texts that we could use to expose the students and help them become educated and informed citizens. But the authors reflect that we are acutely aware that teachers have a difficult time getting students to actually actively read and reflect on these wonderful materials we are supposed to provide them. And so the idea is that they have written a source book of strategies that teachers can use to teach fluent reading, engage learning, vocabulary development, and in a way it really connects history and social studies with literacy skills. They are very interlinked. Chapters 1 through 5 focus on general classroom strategies and activities, and chapters 6 through 8, which Gunnar will go in more detail, will focus on specific literacy strategies on texts that are most commonly used, the textbooks, primary, secondary source documents, and newspapers and magazines. I wanted to focus on one chapter I thought was particularly relevant for EdTPA and language. This chapter 3, it talks about vocabulary development and the importance of students learning vocabulary skills in connection with their social studies learning. And he calls out strategies that are ineffective, which is just directing students to look up definitions in the dictionary or simply sounding things out. And a lot of times these strategies leave students with a very superficial understanding of what the vocabulary they're encountering and leave them more confused than when they start. And so some of these strategies and activities they suggest for this particular language skill are activating prior knowledge. Students do have lots of prior knowledge on vocabulary, more than they may think they have. And he has several activities where he kind of crowdsources definitions of words. Students work individually and then in groups try to crowdsource their knowledge using concept maps and activities. Another strategy the authors focus on is context clues. So figuring out the meaning of the word based on the sentence, using signal words like however. Another strategy that they discuss is structural analysis, and this is where teaching parts of words, Latin roots, suffixes, prefixes, and so devoting some instruction time to this can help students enrich their vocabulary in a lasting way that'll carry over when they read their social studies texts. And they emphasize that to teach vocabulary effectively, the principles of integration, repetition, and then meaningful use. And then finally, they say that teaching vocabulary should be fun, not just drill and memorize, but using word games and puzzles and such, try to integrate that into your instruction. And one interesting thing they have in the book, and I will try to see if I can show it, they have examples of graphical organizers and other activities. Okay, my apologies. My embedded video does not work on Natalie's computer. I was going to demonstrate that the activities I talked about, the concept clues and the ABCs, they have examples in the book. And furthermore, they have a very handy appendix that has an extensive list of the various graphic organizers and the activities that are described in the chapters. Okay, thank you. And here is Gunnar to conclude this segment of the video.
All right.
So we move on to chapter 5. I wanted to take this portion specifically before moving on to part 2 of the actual book, because my whole MO kind of this year in teaching program, teaching political science, has been all about civic engagement, promoting it, how to go about it. So this book had an interesting take on it. So essentially the big part, or the big idea in this chapter, is that schools are important venues for promoting civic education, right? We've talked a little bit about kind of the idea of how teachers, especially in social sciences, will kind of maybe move away from this a little bit in favor of kind of the history aspect more so than the civic aspect, primarily because it can be very controversial, especially in this age of politics. You very much have to dance around what you say unless you want a bunch of angry parents calling for your job, or angry administration that's angry because the angry parents went to them calling for your job, all that baloney. So that being said, this book and I actually share this idea that schools are important venues. So according to the book, according to the campaign for the civic admission of schools, all young people, especially from marginalized communities, be knowledgeable. That's important. Rather, what that should say is that it's important according to the campaign for the civic mission of schools. All young people, especially from marginalized communities, be knowledgeable, so that way they can positively impact their society, positively impact the politics around where they live, around their homes, around their communities. Additionally, schools can teach every young person in the U.S. They have the opportunity to reach every single young person who is enrolled. Of course, there are the unfortunate exceptions of those who do not get the education, but that's few and far in between nowadays with the access that so many people have to free public K through 12 education. So that being said, it's important that we create civically minded citizens, because people as young as 5 years old, children as young as 5 years old are entering the system. We can start them young even. Make sure that they know that they can influence their society, they can influence their local politics, that they can be a difference, right? So the civic education, not just at the high school level in your civics class or political science class or whatever it is, can go an awfully long way with reaching every young person and allowing them to participate in their society and in the democratic processes that run it. Finally, schools can use their community building aspect to their advantage. Every public school is a community. We all know this as student teachers. Obviously, all of our professors know it, and all of our professors that double as public education teachers know this as well. So in this context, even when they're not in the classroom setting, students are arguing, they're discussing, they're coming up with solutions to crummy situations, whatever you name it. So they're already learning these skills of how to participate in society without the classroom. The classroom can just foster a different way of going about it. Specifically in my placement in political science, taking that argument aspect, that kind of eagerness to share your ideas and find your identity aspect, throw that into the mix with the controversial issues, talking about government, talking about candidates, you can really develop a very civically minded and very well informed civically minded community of young people. So that being said, additionally, the National Council for Social Sciences in 2005 acknowledged that civic education deserves a place in the curriculum, a place at the table. So, as future social science educators, we all agree that that's our job to actually implement that. And finally, projects show positive implications. So this is talking about the different kind of projects that are specifically centered around stuff like government bodies, controversial topics that teach students how to be civically minded. 2 examples, the YMCA and youth government, which introduce students to real government functions at the state, local, and federal level, and the Model United Nations program, which can be summed up as saying, making connections between academic learning and solutions of real-world issues. So to wrap this up nice and tidy and all that, part 2 of the book is essentially just full of strategies for textbook, newspaper, and magazine, and primary and secondary source literacy. So those consist of chapters 6 through 8, and it just includes strategy upon strategy to teach students how to develop literacy in these different texts. So for textbooks, kind of the main outline is determine what's important. So instead of teaching every boring paragraph of that old textbook, making sure that students know what is important to learn and throwing away the rest. Organizing the information so that it flows and there's not just jumping from one time period to one time period or one idea to another without any kind of sense of continuity. And finally, teaching them how to analyze figures like maps and graphs, so that way they don't just come about it and skip it thinking it's unimportant. For primary and secondary sources, teaching students to read them like historians, to find clues to answer any kind of inquiry question they might have. And also, additionally, one of the strategies they mentioned, and this is for all of them, to chart sources based on reliability, based on their evaluations. Finally, for newspaper and magazines, teach students about the structure of an article, right? Because a lot of newspapers, a lot of magazines, even if their sole purpose is information, they want to grab people in with the information they have. So they have a lead or their headline, the information. It's also important to remember that newspapers still have biases that can be encountered. So essentially, the way I can also summarize this part 2, chapter 6 through 8, is charts go a long way. They help keep students engaged. They help keep students understanding of the information, and that helps them go a long way, especially when you combine that with some of the team aspect, the teamwork of these chapters. For the EdTPA, you could use just about any strategy in here. There's a million of them. I'd love to tell you all about them, but it looks like I'm running out of time. So the final part I just want to hit on is there are 3 appendices that are useful. Appendix A gives a unit example for immigration to the U.S. It's about 11 pages of content. Appendix B, graphic organizers and resources for vocabulary development. And Appendix C has a civic engagement quiz and resources for promoting civic engagement. And in true fashion of the authors, they even include a studied guide at the very end of the book that helps you understand how to read the book, the same way they kind of do it for these. So, that concludes part 2, and that concludes the whole presentation. Thank you very much for listening.